Have you ever noticed that every time you try to change your life, something pulls you back into the same destructive habits? You start off motivated, but suddenly, without even realizing it, you're right back where you started. And the worst part? It keeps happening, again and again, like you're stuck in an endless loop, sabotaging your own progress. But here's what no one tells you, that resistance isn't about lacking discipline or willpower. It comes from a hidden part of your mind. Carl Jung studied this phenomenon deeply and warned, unless you become aware of it, you'll never truly change. But don't worry, the good news is, there is a way out. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to identify and take control of the invisible force that's been destroying your self-discipline, your productivity, and even your relationships. If you're ready to finally break out of this cycle of self-sabotage, watch until the end. Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try to change, something keeps pulling you back to your old ways? Like there's an invisible force working behind the scenes, blocking your progress? For many people, this isn't just frustrating, it's demoralizing. They feel the desire to change, they try with everything they've got, but something inside them resists. The self-sabotage cycle follows an almost predictable pattern. It all starts with dissatisfaction, whether it's with your body, your productivity, your relationships, or any other area of your life. That dissatisfaction sparks a desire for change, usually paired with a burst of motivation. That's when you decide it's time. You make plans, set goals, commit to new habits. The first few days or weeks feel promising. The sense of control boosts your confidence, and it seems like things are finally falling into place. But then, something shifts. The routine starts to feel heavy. The effort that once felt exciting turns into a burden. Small slips begin to appear. Skipping a day at the gym, procrastinating an important task, falling back into habits you thought you'd left behind. Your mind looks for excuses. Today was tough, just this once. But that just this once keeps repeating. And soon enough, without even realizing it, you're right back where you started. The real problem isn't just going back to old habits, it's the emotional toll of that failure. With every setback comes frustration. With frustration comes guilt. And with guilt, discouragement. A feeling of powerlessness takes over, and you start to believe that maybe change just isn't possible. I know exactly what that fight feels like. For years, I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of failed attempts to change. I always had big ambitions. I wanted to be more disciplined, more productive, more focused. I wanted to build something meaningful, to truly transform my life. But no matter how hard I tried, it felt like something was always pulling me backward. The story was always the same. I'd feel dissatisfied, look in the mirror and think, that's it. Starting today, everything's going to change. And at first, it did. I'd wake up early, organize my day, stay away from distractions, and follow a plan with full commitment. For a few weeks, it felt like I was finally in control of my life. But then, out of nowhere, I'd start to lose momentum. One day, I'd go to bed a bit later. The next, I'd push back an important task. Social media, something I had sworn off, would creep back in. The workouts that once felt essential were now getting skipped. I told myself I was just pausing my progress. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was slipping back into old habits. And when I realized I was once again right where I started, the frustration hit hard. I'd ask myself, why am I like this? Why, even when I know exactly what I need to do, can't I stick with it? The worst part was the feeling of powerlessness. I saw other people succeeding. People who seemed to have unshakable willpower, who committed to something and actually followed through. Meanwhile, I kept making the same mistakes. Over time, my belief in my ability to change started to wear down. I began to think that maybe I just wasn't a disciplined person, that maybe I didn't have what it takes to truly transform my life. That was the moment I decided to dive into the teachings of Carl Jung. If I couldn't change through willpower alone, then something inside me must have been sabotaging me. Something invisible, yet powerful. Through studying Jung, I discovered that within each of us lies a hidden part of the mind, a collection of repressed impulses, beliefs, and emotions that operate without us realizing it. That's when everything started to make sense. The problem was never a lack of motivation or discipline. The real obstacle had always been within me, in the unconscious patterns that controlled my actions without my awareness. The human mind resists change, even when that change is positive. My brain kept me stuck in old habits because that's what it knew. That inertia wasn't my fault. It was a psychological mechanism, automatically programmed to keep me in familiar territory. And I realized that if I truly wanted to change, wanting it more, or trying harder wasn't enough. I needed to understand what was sabotaging me. That was the turning point. The moment I stopped seeing myself as someone who lacked discipline and started investigating the invisible mechanisms that were holding me back. And when I did that, I realized something surprising. Everything I thought was a personal weakness, laziness, procrastination, lack of motivation, wasn't weakness. It was a symptom of something deeper. And that something deeper had a name. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden side of our mind, where all the fears, insecurities, and beliefs that block our progress are buried. Once I started exploring this concept, everything changed. I realized that my self-sabotage wasn't random. It had a logic, a reason to exist. But before I explain how it works, you need to understand one thing. Overcoming self-sabotage doesn't mean you'll never feel internal resistance again. What makes the difference isn't eliminating resistance, but learning how to deal with it. And trust me, once you understand how your shadow works, you realize you have way more control over your life than you ever imagined. The shadow is formed throughout life. From a young age, we learn what's acceptable and what isn't, what we're allowed to express and what must be repressed. If a child shows anger or frustration, parents might say it's wrong. If they act spontaneously in a formal setting, they might get scolded. Slowly, they learn that certain parts of themselves aren't welcome, but those parts don't disappear. They're pushed into the unconscious. The shadow isn't just a container for negative traits. On the contrary, many of the qualities we repress could actually be powerful forces in our lives. But because we've been taught to keep them hidden, they find indirect ways to surface. One of those ways is self-sabotage. Whenever we try to change, grow, or go beyond what we know, we clash with the shadow. It holds all the fears, insecurities, and beliefs that have been programmed over a lifetime. If someone grew up hearing they're not good enough, the shadow will make sure that belief keeps playing on repeat, even if the person has all the skills to move forward. If someone was taught that being ambitious is wrong, that unconscious part may block any attempt to succeed. And the way this happens is almost unnoticeable. At first, change feels easy. The person feels motivated, full of energy, convinced that this time will be different. But then, out of nowhere, they start feeling tired, unmotivated, lazy. Small distractions show up. Time seems to vanish. Something inside starts creating excuses to postpone or give up. What once felt like a solid plan for transformation crumbles into invisible justifications. The shadow doesn't act directly. It works behind the scenes, interfering with thoughts and emotions without the person noticing. Someone might spend years trying to figure out why they can't stick to a habit, never suspecting that, deep down, there's an unconscious part resisting that change. And that resistance can take many forms. Sometimes it shows up as procrastination, the urge to delay what matters for no clear reason. Other times, it appears as harsh self-criticism, that inner voice saying, "Why even bother?" It can also surface as recurring patterns, like always ending up in toxic relationships or constantly abandoning projects halfway through. The conscious mind wants to move forward, but the shadow pulls back. That's because it represents the comfort zone, the familiar. Even when someone is unhappy with their life, repeating what they know feels safer than the unknown. To the unconscious, change is a threat. And when there's a threat, the shadow steps in to protect the person, even if that protection means holding them back. The more someone ignores the shadow, the more power it gains. It's like a hidden program running in the background, influencing decisions, creating invisible obstacles, shaping destiny, without the person even realizing it. Self-sabotage isn't about a lack of discipline or effort. It's a reflection of an internal conflict between the conscious desire to change and the unconscious forces trying to keep things the same. The solution isn't to fight the shadow. Whatever we battle in the unconscious only grows stronger. The real path is to recognize that hidden part and bring it into the light of awareness. Only when we face the shadow can we stop it from silently hijacking our choices. If the shadow operates behind the scenes, influencing our decisions without us realizing it, the first step to overcoming it is to recognize it. But that's no easy task. Precisely because this part of the psyche was pushed into the unconscious, it doesn't show up in obvious ways. The shadow hides in repetitive patterns that seem to defy logic. Someone decides to improve their health but always finds excuses to avoid exercise. They want to be more productive, but feel blocked every time they try to start an important project. They say they want a healthy relationship, but always end up choosing partners who reinforce old wounds. None of this happens by chance. The unconscious builds defense mechanisms to keep the shadow out of conscious awareness. The problem is that protection comes at a high cost. The person stays trapped in cycles that sabotage their growth. For Jung, bringing the shadow into consciousness requires self-observation. That means noticing when the same problems keep coming up and questioning where they come from. But he wasn't the only thinker to explore this idea. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, one of the early voices of existentialism, spoke of something similar, which he called unconscious despair. He believed many people live in a state of self-deception, running from the truth about themselves because facing it would be too painful. Kierkegaard argued that true freedom only emerges when a person becomes aware of what's holding them back. And here's the central point. Identifying the shadow takes courage. It's uncomfortable to realize that some of your self-destructive behaviors aren't just about lacking motivation, but are rooted in something deeper. Seeing the shadow means facing fears, frustrations, and beliefs that have been buried for years. This doesn't just mean reflecting on your past. It also means noticing how certain patterns still repeat themselves today. One way to do this is by paying attention to moments of intense emotional reaction. Whenever something triggers a disproportionate discomfort, there's often a repressed part of you trying to surface. Another way is by observing your projections. When you harshly judge or criticize others, many times, what bothers us most in someone else is actually a reflection of something we've rejected in ourselves. If someone gets irritated by people who show confidence, it might be because deep down, they learned that showing confidence was wrong. If they feel envy towards someone who takes risks, it may be because they're unconsciously afraid of taking risks themselves. The shadow doesn't reveal itself directly, but it always leaves clues. Identifying it isn't about self-blame. It's a process of liberation. Imagine you're walking through a long, dark hallway filled with closed doors. Behind each one lies a part of you that's been locked away over the years. Some doors hide repressed anger, others contain talents you never dared to develop, and some hold fears you tried to forget. You've always known those doors were there, but you avoided opening them. The problem is, no matter how much you ignore them, they still influence everything you do. The shadow doesn't disappear just because it's unseen. On the contrary, when left in the dark, it acts on its own, without control or awareness. What Jung proposed wasn't a battle to destroy this hidden part, but the opposite. Open the doors and meet what's inside. To integrate the shadow is to become whole, to reunite the parts of yourself that were once rejected. So, how do you actually do that? The first thing that happens when someone chooses to face their shadow is discomfort. It's like turning on a light in a basement filled with years of clutter. At first, the dust rises and the mess feels overwhelming, but with time, your eyes adjust to the new view. Jung called this process making the unconscious conscious. And that doesn't just mean knowing the shadow exists. It means learning how to talk to it. One of the most effective ways to do that is through reflective writing. Instead of avoiding uncomfortable thoughts, write about them, as if having a conversation with your own mind. Ask yourself, what am I trying to avoid? Why does this bother me so much? What is this part of me trying to tell me? That inner dialogue can reveal a lot about the fears and blocks that drive self-sabotage. But there's another aspect of the shadow that often goes unnoticed. It doesn't just hold what we fear. It also holds what we secretly desire. Often, the things we admire in others and believe are out of reach are actually buried in our own shadow, waiting to be reclaimed. Someone who envies a confident person might actually be suppressing their own desire to express themselves freely. Nietzsche explored this idea when he spoke about the free spirit. Someone who allows themselves to be authentic and whole, unafraid of what others might think. For him, the great tragedy of life was that many spend their lives trying to fit into molds imposed by society, while their true essence remains locked away inside them. Integrating the shadow is not just a healing process. It's a process of liberation. When you recognize what you've rejected, you reclaim parts of yourself that hold real power. Repressed anger can become determination. Fear can become caution. A hidden desire can become action. At the end of the day, opening the doors of your mind is an act of courage. There's no growth without facing what you've left behind. But when you do, something powerful happens. You gain the ability to live without fear of yourself. Understanding the shadow is a huge step, but real impact comes from practice. Jung said, One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, just recognizing your unconscious patterns isn't enough. You have to actively face them to stop them from sabotaging your life. One technique that helps in this process is gradual exposure. The unconscious mind resists change because it sees the unknown as a threat. The problem is, many people try to change too abruptly, forcing new behaviors and triggering even stronger resistance. The most effective way to deal with this is to introduce small doses of transformation. If the fear of failure is paralyzing, the first step isn't to aim for perfection, but to allow small failures without punishment. If procrastination is the issue, the goal isn't to do everything at once, but to start with just 5 minutes of action. The unconscious needs to get used to change before it can fully accept it. Also, the way we manage our daily habits has a direct impact on our psyche. Self-sabotage often shows up in automatic routines we repeat without even noticing. That's where the concept of habit reversal comes in. Widely discussed in Atomic Habits by James Clear. He explains that the most common mistake when trying to create a new routine is focusing only on the new habit, without removing the triggers of the old ones. If someone wants to reduce time on social media, just promising to use the phone less doesn't work. What's more effective is changing the environment, like removing apps or leaving the phone in another room. Jung also believed that the unconscious reacts to symbolic actions. When we change our external environment, we send a message of transformation to our inner world. Another fundamental technique is behavioral activation, a psychological principle based on the idea that action comes before motivation. Many people wait to feel ready before taking action. But the truth is, the mind only adapts to a new identity after the body has already begun acting like it. Jung believed the unconscious reveals itself through direct experience, not just rational thought. So, instead of waiting for energy or motivation to make a change, just take the first step, no matter how small. If you need to start a project, open a document and write anything. If you want to work out, just put on your workout clothes and go for a walk. Small, repeated actions begin to reshape the unconscious to accept the new identity you're building. The technique of opposite action can also be incredibly powerful. Often, self-sabotage puts us on autopilot, avoiding challenges, procrastinating, or giving in to fear. But if instead of following that impulse, we do the exact opposite, we can interrupt unconscious patterns. If a sabotaging thought says, "Do it later," act immediately. If your shadow is making you avoid talking to someone out of insecurity, start a conversation. Jung described this process as the need to challenge your inner archetypes so they no longer control your psyche. Meditation and mindfulness are also essential tools for integrating the shadow. The unconscious manifests through automatic thoughts, impulses, and repressed emotions, and the act of simply observing these phenomena without reacting to them can lessen their power. Jung saw meditation as a way to establish a direct channel with the unconscious, allowing it to express itself without resistance. Through moments of mindfulness, you learn to recognize when your shadow is trying to influence you, without having to give in. Another practical exercise is the unfinished tasks list. Jung believed the process of individuation, that is, becoming a complete person, involves integrating parts of the psyche that have been fragmented over time. On a more practical level, this fragmentation shows up in the small promises we make to ourselves and never fulfill. Every unfinished task, every abandoned project, represents a small crack in identity. Creating a list of loose ends and tackling them one by one can be a powerful symbolic act of reintegration. While all these techniques can be applied individually, it's important to remember that the unconscious is vast and complex. Jung spent his life studying the human psyche and understood that some patterns are too difficult to face alone. Seeking help from a professional, a therapist, psychoanalyst, or psychologist, can greatly accelerate the process and help reveal layers of the shadow we might never see on our own. Self-knowledge is a deep and ongoing journey, and having a guide can make all the difference. Integrating the shadow is not just about overcoming self-sabotage, it's a path to liberation. When we learn to recognize our inner resistance and apply effective techniques to overcome it, we stop being prisoners of the unconscious and become the protagonists of our own lives. Changing yourself isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous process. Many people believe that a single moment of epiphany is enough to change everything, as if one decision could rebuild habits, beliefs, and behaviors. But the truth is, real transformation doesn't happen suddenly. It's built slowly, through the daily practice of becoming more conscious. Integrating the shadow isn't the end. It's the beginning. After opening the doors to what was hidden, a new challenge appears. What do you do with that knowledge? It's not enough to identify patterns, recognize flaws, or understand your blocks. The real question is how to turn that awareness into real action. One answer lies in internal coherence. Many people fail to change because there's a conflict between who they want to be and how they actually live. They want to be disciplined but still identify as someone who always procrastinates. They want success but carry beliefs that associate it with something negative. The mind won't accept change when a person's identity is still tied to the past. That's why the first step to lasting transformation is rebuilding identity from the inside out. Instead of just trying to force new habits, the key is to start seeing yourself as someone who already lives those habits. Someone who wants to be more productive, for example, needs to stop thinking, "I'm lazy and need to change," and start acting like the disciplined person they want to become. This principle is supported by many modern philosophers and psychologists, but also has ancient roots. Aristotle said we become what we repeatedly do. For him, excellence wasn't an innate talent, but a habit cultivated every day. In other words, identity isn't fixed, it's shaped by repeated action over time. Real change happens in the small details. In the moment when someone chooses to act differently, even when the mind urges them to go back to the old pattern, each choice reinforces a new version of self. Every small victory, no matter how insignificant it may seem, strengthens the identity of who you're becoming. But here's an important detail. True transformation requires patience. Many people give up because they expect quick, drastic results without understanding that the process is gradual. Integrating the shadow, changing patterns, and building a new identity takes time. The most common mistake is believing that failing along the way means going back to square one. But failure is part of growth. No change process is linear. There are ups and downs, moments of doubt, and setbacks. What sets apart those who truly change from those who stay stuck in the same cycle isn't the absence of mistakes, but the ability to keep moving forward despite them. In the end, knowing yourself isn't a philosophical luxury. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to live authentically and free from self-sabotage. True transformation doesn't happen when we eliminate our flaws, but when we learn to integrate them, use them, and grow through them. Self-sabotage is a cycle that traps many people in destructive patterns without them even realizing it. We spend our lives trying to change through sheer willpower, but deep down, the real blockage lies within us, in the unconscious forces that shape our actions. Carl Jung showed us that what we don't acknowledge within ourselves continues to control us. Only when we become aware of our resistance and confront the shadow can we regain control over our own lives. If you've made it this far, it means you've already taken an important step on the path of self-awareness. Understanding your shadow, identifying self-sabotaging patterns, and applying practical exercises to reprogram your mind can completely transform the way you approach challenges and change. It not only improves your discipline and focus, but also brings a true sense of freedom, because you stop fighting against yourself and start using your own psyche in your favor. Real change happens when you act. No technique works unless you put it into practice. So choose one of the exercises discussed in this video and start today. It can be a small tweak in your routine, a shift in your environment, or a new conscious habit. What matters is starting. Now I want to hear from you. What was the biggest insight you had from this video? Comment below. I'm ready to face my shadow if you watched until the end. That way, I'll know you're part of the select group of people committed to their self-awareness and transformation. If this video helped you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like. That not only helps me keep creating content like this, but also ensures you won't miss upcoming videos on self-awareness, psychology, and personal growth. See you in the next video.